Okay, we're going to start off by creating these two tables first. The first one is sport, and there are two fields. There is the sport name. So we have different sports here like football, tennis, cricket, swimming, and athletics, and each sport has an ID like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then we're going to create another table called player, and in this table we have four fields: ID, first name, last name, and date of birth. And the concept here is that we have different players like Roger Federer, Usain Bolt, Ian Thorpe, and that these players play different sports. So eventually we're going to be linking the player table to the sports table. But in the beginning, this is where we're going to start. We're going to create a sport table with these two fields, and we're going to create a player table with these four fields. Alright, so let's get started. Let's first create the sport table. Okay, let me write a query to create the sport table. We're going to say create table sport, and within our table we want two fields, right? First field would be ID, which is integer, and the second field would be sport name, right? What was the field name? Let me check. It was sport name, right? So the second field is sport name, right? So a sport name is basically we use varchar as a data type, and just think of varchar like you use the string data type in Visual Basic, or the string data type in Python or any other language. And it's made up of multiple characters. So varchar is basically an equivalent of string, right? And here you can also specify how many characters, how many maximum characters can a sport name have. So for example, if we say 10 here, then that means that the sport name field can have a value uh, which cannot be more than 10 characters long, right? So you're specifying the maximum length here. Okay, and finally, what do we want? We want to set uh, this ID here. We want this ID to be the primary key, right? So we're going to say primary key is going to be ID. Okay, so that's it. And let me just execute this. Let's see. And so the table has been created. If we take a look at the left side here, we can, okay, let me refresh it first. uh, let's see, hang on. There you see, this is the sport table, right? And when I expand that, we can see that it has two columns: ID, which is the primary key, and sport name, which is varchar, right? So we've created this table. Let's try and create the other table now. Okay, so this is the second table that we want to create. We want to have ID as the primary key, first name, which is going to be varchar, last name, which is also going to be varchar, and date of birth, which is going to have the date data type. So let's create this table using SQL. So we're going to say create table player, and in this table we're going to have ID, which is going to be integer. Then we're going to have first name, which is going to be varchar, and we can choose some suitable length. For example, 10 would be, 10 characters long would be a good length. That's the maximum length of the first name. Last name, once again would be varchar. We would say another 10 characters, right? Um, and then finally we have the date of birth, right? And the date of birth has the date data type. Now that we've added all the fields with the respective data types, we want to set this ID field as a primary key. So quickly, primary key is going to be ID, right? So that's it. And if I execute this statement, you can And let me refresh this. You'll see that the second table called player has also been created, and we can see, we have all the four fields here where ID is the primary key. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to add these values here, right? We want to add these values to our table, right? So this is the data that we want to add to our table. And let's see, 1 is football, 2 is tennis, 3 is cricket, 4 is swimming, and 5 is athletics. So let's see how we're going to do that using SQL. Okay, so we're going to say we want to insert into the table sport values where ID is 1 and the sport name was football, remember, and football was varchar, just like string, we put quotes around it, and we say that the second data value is football, right? So this one is basically for the first field, which is ID, and this second one is the sport name, right? I hope you remember, that's the sequence. The first field was ID and the second one was sport name. Remember, this sequence is very important. So the first value here must be an integer because the ID field comes first, and the second value must be varchar because the sport name comes second. So this sequence is very important when we add values. And let me just quickly copy these statements. Let me just pause the video and copy these statements so that I can add all these insert statements for tennis, cricket, swimming, and athletics. Okay, so I have all the 5 statements: 1 football, 2 tennis, 3 cricket, 4 swimming, and 5 athletics. They're all ready, and I'm just going to execute this. And what we can do is, so these values have been added to our table, and what we can do is we can check if these values have been added or not. So let me write another query. I want uh, so we want to see all the fields, so I'm going to say select star. So this would, star means show all the fields, so select star from table sports. Was it sports or was it sports? Sports, right? What was the table name? Was it sport or was it? Yes, it was sport, right? It was not sports, it was sport. So select star from sport, and if I execute, you can see that the server is returning all the values. 1 is football, 2 is tennis, 3 is cricket, 4 is swimming, and 5 is athletics. So all the fields, all the values have been added to our table. Okay, next up, what we want to do is we want to add all of these values in the player table, right? So let's see. Let's write the insert statement for this. We want to insert all of these values into the player table. So this time we're going to say insert into the table name was player. Insert into player values, and we must remember the sequence, right? So the first one is ID, so this must be an integer value. Then we have varchar as first name, varchar as last name, and then we have date is the date of birth. Okay, so let me just say the values that I want to add is 1, first name is Roger, right? So I'm going to put this in quotes because it's, and the second name we know is what? It's Federer, right? So let me just add that real quick. And finally we have the date, right? And in date we have the year first, the month second, and the date last, right? So that's the format of the date. And what are we going to do? Let me put quotes here, and let me see. So it was what? 1980 05 21, 1980 05 dash 21, and let's just add this one row first, right? Let's just execute this one row first and see if it gets added. And yes, it did get added. So let me just quickly show you that this row actually got added. Sorry, I messed up. Okay, there you go. Let me just write the statement to see our records in the player table. So we want to select all the fields from the player table, right? And so this is going to show us all the fields, all the records in the player table. And when I execute this, you can see that we only have one row as of now. So one is player number one is Roger Federer, and his date of birth is 1980, 5th month, on the 21st day of the month, right? So let me add the remaining data to our database. So we've already added Roger Federer, and these are the remaining values that we're going to add. So I'm going to pause the video real quick and write down the insert statements and execute them in one go. So I have these statements ready. I'm going to be adding four more players: Usain Bolt, Ian Thorpe, Novak Djokovic, and Hassan Ali. So when I execute this statement, all of these four rows got added. And let me just uh, run. I want to see all the records in the player table. So select star from player. Star means show all the fields, right? And remember that the sports table basically has these four fields. So I want to see all of the fields. That's why I'm saying select star, right? So show all the fields and all the records from the player table, right? So when I execute this, you can see that these five players have been added to our table. Okay, let's try and understand the select statement better. See, when I say star, that means all the fields. That means show me the ID, the values in the ID field, the first name, the last name, and the date of birth. So it's going to show me the values for all the fields. So this is where we can choose, for example, if I only want to see the player's first name and his date of birth, I can say select first name, comma, date of birth. So these are the two columns, these are the two fields that I'm interested in. I just want to see the first name and the date of birth. So this is where I specify, the column names or the field names from the play table. Okay. So I've specified which columns I want to see, first name and date of birth, and I've mentioned the name of the table, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to show me all the records, record number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 from the table, but it's only going to choose the first name and the date of birth from these records. So for all of these five records, I will see the first name and the date of birth. When I execute this, you can see, from my table, only the first name and the date of birth have been picked. Okay. Um, but what if I only want to see, and let me just go back to, I just want to see all the fields, so I'm going to use the steric sign here, and you can see, we can see all the fields in the table now: ID, first name, last name, date of birth. But what if I want to see, I don't want to see all the records, I don't want to see all the records here, right? So I just want to see, for example, the record belonging to player number 3, right? And remember the ID is 3, right? So I want to see the record for this player only, whose ID is 3. So what can I do here? So I can, so if I just want to choose one row, for example, I just want to choose this row, then I use the where clause, where statement, where I can specify that the ID of the player is 3. So what I'm basically saying is, for example, I want to see the first name and the last name of the player whose ID is 3. So this is going to choose the first name and the last name of the player whose ID is 3. Okay, let's see. When I execute this, what happens? See, the third player was Ian Thorpe, right? So I shouldn't say the third player. The player whose ID was 3 was Ian Thorpe. And I can just change this. We remember, that Roger Federer's ID was 1. When I execute this, it's going to show me his record. So I can even, I can use this where clause to choose the record I want. If I don't write this, if I don't write the where clause, it's going to show me all the records in the table. So it's going to show me the first name and last name of every player in the table. So this where clause is very important, right? For example, um, we can say show me the first name and last name of all the players uh, whose ID is, for example, greater than 3. If I execute this, it's going to show me two players, Novak Djokovic and Hassan Ali, because and let me just add the ID here so that you get a better idea. So this time when I execute this, you'll see that the ID of Novak Djokovic was 4, which is greater than 3 here, and the ID of Hassan Ali was 5, which is greater than 3. So remember, this where clause is going to help us pick the records, right? Instead of showing all the records in the table, we can now choose the player whose record we want to um, take a look at.